Hi everyone. For the lecture today, I really want to just carry out a preliminary look at industrial relations because that will underpin the theme and content of much of the unit. All of the unit in some ways, but much of the unit in direct ways. And today I just want to talk about what industrial relations are and also link that with the fact that we see this unit as being very much a sport in the workplace unit. To a little extent, we've caught up with the traditional name of industrial relations in sport, which is still relevant, and so that's what I want to examine. But bear in mind, we're talking about industrial relations as they affect us in the sport workplace. So a definition, of course you can look them up in print, online or whatever. So if I give you a content definition, it's a start, and any sound definition that you feel is appropriate, which you might change through the unit, would be a good one to start with. So I've got down for myself that employment relations and institutions associated with these relations are part of industrial relations. They include, or they very much relate to, the workplace, considerations of conditions, labour management relations, the way workplaces are regulated, the way workplace interaction takes place, and the ways decisions are made and carried out in the workplace. And it's really industrial relations, we could say, the relations that shape employee-employer relationships, actions and employment in the sport industry. So consider what employees want in the sport industry and what employers want. And we can make a list of these. In fact, on my desk I've made a list of these this morning, and if we go through them, then we would be able to find a list, for example, of what employees want, and I'll only suggest two because part of this lecture you can add to this. But employees probably want a safe workplace. They want a workplace that facilitates achievement of their career goals. That's just two things. What do employers want? They want probably the steady employment of the employee and a high level of productivity. And again, you can add other things that employers might want. Are these competing interests though? And this is a key question for you to consider. Are the employees' interests in a sport workplace, are the employers' interests in a sport workplace opposing, compatible, sometimes even perhaps congruent? If you think of the coach and the team in a professional sport. If you think of perhaps the boss, if you like, in an equipment factory and the employees, then we might find there are more competing interests if the pressure's on to achieve a certain deadline for a range of production lines. So consider carefully, are these competing interests, compatible interests, or are they sometimes one, sometimes the other? Can you have high productivity and high worker satisfaction? Relates very much to the workplace, to industrial relations. And do regulations shape the relationships in the workplace? In other words, the human dimension of employment, how is that shaped by regulations, be they statute, be they law, be they regulations in effect that the workplace has imposed? How does the relationship that exists between employee, employer, employee and employee, employee and customer or client, employee and the field they're working in, which say might be competitive rugby, league, netball, whatever, how are they shaped by the regulations? You can think of them one end, and we've discussed already with that excellent class tutorial on sport tribunals, how relationships, employment might be shaped by decisions of the tribunal. Might be shaped by what we learn next week about player agents and player managers and what they achieve for their players. Integral to understanding industrial relations, also in the workplace and sport, are the workplace agreements and the way workplace agreements are formed, the influence of the law upon these, and we'll be talking about Fair Work Australia in the unit later on. How do player associations and agents shape the employment at the professional level? Another one that's relevant to this, how do different agencies beyond the immediate sport workplace shape professional sport and professional sport employment? And here we have for example, the tribunals we've mentioned, but consider on the international stage the influence of international sport bodies such as the IOC, Court of Arbitration. Consider also another agency that's not directly into the workplace in some ways, but many would think pervade in others, the taxation. And taxation laws will affect employees. So we're facing a number of influences, and these influences, we could almost say, are levels of regulation. Institutions of the workplace, statute law, another set, common law, and then we have the labour market and market forces. Another question that we need to ask is, how do sports organisations work in terms of labour management relations? And this is something that we'll be covering within the lectures, but remember this as part of understanding industrial relations in sport. How the sports organisations work in terms of labour and management relations. And one clue or foreshadowing of this is that there have been changes over time as sports become more professional and sport employment has become more linked to unions and sport organisations and to outside laws and regulations. Then we'll also consider during the course of the unit how employment issues can be resolved, and then we move right back to the start when we think about, okay, how do we move into this workplace ourselves, and what do we need to think about. So consider those carefully, and then we'll have a short part 2 of this particular lecture. So the main thing in summary is to have a working definition of industrial relations, remember how industrial relations can shape the sport workplace, and then consider the goals, aims, ethos if you like, of employee goals and desires for themselves in the workplace, and employer goals and desires for their success in the workplace in terms of productivity, probably, and results.